Hello, everyone. Welcome. We will give it a few minutes before we get started just to allow folks to join. My name is Lea Dyga. I'm the environmental educator at the Grand Traverse Conservation District. I'm going to be your host tonight. And while we wait, I was wondering if anyone wanted to share in the chat some mushroom foraging events or like adventures that they've gotten on. This is the second of this series, so we did this last month. So since last month, has anyone gotten into any mushroom foraging? Or I guess it doesn't even have to be in the last month, but say hi in the chat. Let me know if you've foraged recently at all. Let me know where you're calling in from. Chris says they found a nice batch of oysters in Leelanau County a week or so ago. I also found some oysters recently. We'll be talking about them tonight. Be inspired by that. Is last month available for view? Yes. You can find it on the Grand Traverse Conservation District's YouTube channel. Note that we recorded last month and we'll be recording this month. So if you do not want to appear in the recording, like video wise, I think it should just be me, but keep your camera off if you're worried about that. This video and then also the slide deck will be made available to anyone who registered. We'll be sending a follow-up email with these resources for you. Allie found no mushrooms, but some cute toads. Allie is our programs and operations coordinator at the Grand Traverse Conservation District. So she will be she'll help monitor chat today for us. Thanks, Allie. Jake's asking about these mushrooms. These are wine taps, a very charismatic edible mushroom that grows in July, but unfortunately we won't be doing a deep dive on. Right, we'll maybe give it 2 more minutes here. That is asking why morel hunting has been. I agree, morel hunting has been pretty awful the last couple of years. I think it's just the weather has not been like right, too hot, too dry, and then when it is cool enough, there's not enough rain. But I've definitely also been experiencing that. If you hunt a little further down state like Luther and that kind of stuff, I've had a little bit of luck there. Last month's is available on the Grand Traverse Conservation District's website. I think it's just, or not website, YouTube. I think it's just Grand Traverse Conservation District on YouTube. And you'll see last month's mushroom of the month, June wild edibles. And we found some black morels. Yeah, a few weeks back. That seems pretty late in their season, but I'd believe it. Mushrooms, we try and assign them a season, but they really just do what they want. All right. I think some people will probably still be trickling in, but I think we should go ahead and get started. So I'll introduce myself again. My name is Lea Dyga. I'm the full-time environmental educator at the Grand Traverse Conservation District, and this is the second installment of our Mushrooms of the Month Wild Edibles. Today we are talking about July wild edibles. So I do these like at the end of the month, usually the last Tuesday of the month, to prepare you for foraging for the upcoming month. So if you're interested in what we covered for June, again, that's available on the Grand Traverse Conservation District's YouTube channel. You can find the recording of that webinar there. But yeah, all right. I think let's get into it. We only have an hour, so I'm going to be going a little quickly. So if you have questions at any time, go ahead and put those in the chat and I'll try to get to them when I can. Before we get started, though, I want to talk about environmental education at the Grand Traverse Conservation District and what it is that we do in this department. So the mission of the environmental education team at GTCD is to facilitate the exploration and study of the outdoors in whatever way possible, empower individuals to play a personal role in environmental stewardship, and to inspire future generations of conservation leaders. And we do this through a variety of services. A couple of them I have listed here. For example, our Boardman River Nature Center, located on Cass Road. This is where the Conservation District is housed. This is where our office is as well. The Boardman River Nature Center is open to the public from 11 to 2, Tuesday through Friday. And it's under renovation right now, still open. But if you visit in the next couple weeks, I think you'll be very surprised to see that a lot of things are changing on the inside. We have a cool exhibit being installed right now, along with our nature, which the construction of that will be done soon. We host field trips for school groups and after school groups, and we have day camps. So our summer nature day camp is full swing now. We're in our second week. We host projects. This is for formal and informal educators to learn about best practices for teaching about the environment. We have public resources and events, so such as our lending library. You can come borrow some, like rain boots and, nets, learning things, books from our nature center, and then events like this. And we also do community science projects. So shout out to anyone who maybe came to our macroinvertebrate survey last week. We were down in Robbins Creek assessing the water quality of Robbins Creeks by digging around and looking for little water bugs. So we do lots of cool stuff. If you want to learn more about our environmental education department at the Grand Traverse Conservation District, you can check out natureiscalling.org /about-edu. And again, my name is Lea Dyga. You can reach me. Here's a picture of me looking at a conch in maybe December. It's really my job to answer any questions about the environment, whether it be plants and mushrooms or bears. I will find you the answer or connect you to someone who can. So reach out to me at any time. There's my email. All right. And with that, I'd like to give a little roadmap of what I have to cover for you tonight. So we'll start with an overview of the wild edibles of July. I'm going to go over just a brief overview of all of the choice edibles that grow in Michigan in July. Probably not all of them, but a good handful. We'll review some personal foraging rights. So when and where and how you can forage for mushrooms, and some mushroom ID basics. These sections because we covered them last month, so you can look at that last video if you'd like an in-depth rundown of those. And then we're going to do a more in-depth study of 3 genera of mushrooms. We're going to be looking at the Chanterelles, the Hedgehog mushrooms, and the Oyster mushrooms tonight. Some tips for how to identify and harvest and prepare them. Those ones I think are pretty sought after, so those are the 3 that I decided we should probably do a deep dive on. We'll again go over some foraging and consumption best practices, just some tips for foraging and consuming wild mushrooms. A little bit of a crash course because again, we covered these last month as well. And we'll have time at the end for resources and questions. So if that sounds like a plan to you all, I'm going to get right into it. So again, a little bit of background, I guess, of why I wanted to do this kind of work. Morel season is very short, March through May-ish. Marcella is our morel genus. And there's a lot of fervor to like learn about mushrooms during these months. But as a wild forage mushroom identification expert, I know that mushrooms grow all throughout the year. So I wanted to give opportunity for people to be wild about mushrooms, wild about wild mushrooms all through the year. So we're looking at what grows in July. I believe there are 13 different genera or genera or species that grow during July, and a couple toxic ones, which we're not going to be talking about today, but be aware that there are some toxic mushrooms growing right now too. A lot of these will continue throughout the summer. A lot of mushrooms grow July through October, so you can set yourself up to hunt all through the summer with this video. So what's growing this month? First of all, are Cantharellus, the Chanterelles. These are a well sought after mushroom, kind of not your like intro mushroom, but once you get into mushroom foraging, these are highly sought after. We're going to be doing a deep dive on these. Next, we have the shaggy mane, the Coprinus comatus. I covered these last month. Very common mushroom, very tricky to harvest at the right time. Another one is our Ganoderma species. These fruit all through the season. The name that you might know them by is reishi. These are not edible in the sense that you will fry them in a pan and eat them. They're more of a medicinal mushroom where you would want to like make a powder and then a tea or a tincture or something like that. Another one is our Hydnum species, the hedgehog mushrooms. These ones are one that we'll be covering today. They're pretty cool. They've got these spines on the underneath. Also, we have the lobster mushroom, the Hypomyces lactiflorum. This is a really fun mushroom, but maybe not great for an intro wild foraging class because these mushrooms are parasitic. They're macroparasitic, meaning they are parasites on other mushrooms. So there's a bullet mushroom under here, and it's covered in this like orange velvety fuzz, and that's the lobster mushroom. The mushroom is a micro fungus, a tiny little fungus that parasitizes on a macrofungus, a larger mushroom. So pretty cool mushroom, maybe not great for an intro class. We then have chaga. If you're from the Leelanau Grand Traverse region, you might be familiar with chaga. It grows pretty commonly up here on birch trees. You can find it all through the year, but it's growing from July to October usually. You have to be careful with harvesting them. They grow very slowly, so you want to make sure you're doing it sustainably. But I find that a lot of people are crazy about chaga up here. Local coffee shops like Mundo's used to sell like a chaga mint tea. That was pretty tasty. Also growing starting in June and through into the fall, chicken of the woods, the Letoporus genus. These ones grow mostly with oak trees. On the base of oak trees is common, also sometimes on the side. If you find one of these, I recommend harvesting the tips of these, like this margin right here, because you can cut those off and then 2 or 3 weeks later, it'll grow back. And then you have more mushroom. You don't necessarily have to take the whole thing. It's a big mushroom to eat anyway. So just take the tips. Those are the best part anyway. And then come back in a couple weeks for more mushroom. Next, oyster mushrooms, the Pleurotus genus. These ones are so far my favorite wild edible to eat. And my chart here covers a variety of different species because they have a variation in when they fruit, but more or less they'll grow all year as long as the conditions are right. I found a couple of these a couple weeks ago, and someone in the chat had also found them, so they're out. And then last but not least, we have the wine caps, the Strophoria rugosa. Yeah, there we go. Wine caps, or they're called garden giants because, as you can see in my background, they get pretty big. And if you garden giant, they grow in gardens and on mulch beds. These ones again will grow through October. Very charismatic mushroom. I like them a lot. And then lastly, growing well right now, we have turkey tail. Probably heard of this before, Trametes versicolor. This is another medicinal mushroom that you're not going to fry up and eat. It needs to more like be dehydrated and put in a tea or a tincture. Trametes versicolor, I will warn you, is a little bit tricky to identify like this exact species. There's a lot of Termites out there, but Termites versicolor is the one that has the medicinal properties that people seek for treating like breast cancer and boosting the immune system and that kind of stuff. So just do a little research if you're going to go out and try and harvest some turkey tail, even though it's everywhere. It's super common. All right. Is there any like questions anyone wants to? I'm going to do a deep dive on some of those, but if there's any questions on some of those other mushrooms before we get into foraging rights. Let's see anything in the chat. Okay. All right. I'll get into foraging rights, and if you have any questions, just go ahead and put them in the chat. So as a person, you are able to forage for yourself. If you're considering foraging to sell to other people, to sell to a restaurant, to sell wholesale, anything like that, you need to go and get like 2 other licenses. But if you're just harvesting for yourself and for your friends and your family, you are able to do that free of charge in a variety of different places, including DNR public land, national forests, and private land with owner's permission. I would say that private land is probably your best option if you know someone. Otherwise, I would go for DNR public land because there's good maps of those. You can harvest on for either personal or commercial use. So either way, national parks or metro or county parks, though rules can vary. There are some county parks that like the local municipality allow harvesting off of. So just check. Sometimes that's a thing that happens. But the First National Education Reserve is no pick. Most of our parks are no pick. So please don't harvest off of any of the lands managed by the Grand Traverse Conservation District. If you're interested in harvesting off of public land, so we're talking the Department of Natural Resources, the DNR, you have 4.6 million to choose from, including state forests, state parks, and state game and wildlife areas. Unfortunately, there isn't really a map of all of these public lands, like one cohesive map, but you can find digital maps at this link right here, which I think Ali will be oh so kind to include in the follow-up email. I would start with state forests because that's where you have the most land available to you, and that's probably also best mushroom country, best mushroom habitat. So you have 3.9 million acres to choose from there. There is, although there doesn't exist like a cohesive map through the DNR, there is this app called Onyx Hunt, which if you're serious about mushroom foraging or hunting in general, this is a great app. I know a lot of hunters and a lot of foragers that use this app. It's available on your smartphone and or like just on the web. It is a paid service, so it's $30 a year, but that's really not bad if you're like serious about this kind of stuff. And it shows you the boundaries between public and private land and tells you who owns it. It can tell you even just like if you're looking for a certain ecosystem. So say we're looking for oyster mushrooms and we know that they grow in aspens, so we'll look for an ecosystem that has aspens or something like that. It can filter by that, and it's a great tool. It shows you boundaries. You can mark locations. So if you see a chicken of the woods growing here, and you want to come back in 2 or 3 weeks and harvest those tips again, you can mark it with this app. So that's a great option. I would investigate that if you're serious about mushroom hunting or hunting in general. You can also forage off of national forests. So we have 3 national forests in Michigan broken into 5 different parcels. We have the Ottawa National Forest, the Hiawatha National Forest, and then our Huron-Manistee National Forest. A lot of the mushrooms that we're talking about today are more found in this like Hiawatha region in the UP. However, Manistee has always been good mushroom hunting territory for me. Just like the DNR land, you sometimes do need like a day pass, like a recreation pass, or like $5 to get into some of these trailheads and picnic areas, but you don't need any other permit to harvest wild edibles. That's including, you know, like berries and that kind of stuff. So mushrooms, berries, anything like that. The only thing for is if you're harvesting wood for firewood, or if you find like a log with like oyster mushrooms growing on them, Unfortunately, you can't just like pick up and take that log. You do need a permit to do that. But if you're picking mushrooms, fair game. You don't need any other permits. And then just to reiterate, where you cannot forage national parks. So if you're walking the Pictured Rocks National Shoreline and you see a really cute chanterelle, unfortunately, you should probably leave it. That's only legal. And then metro and county parks, though there might be some exceptions. However, the Grand Traverse National Natural Education Reserve and most of our trails are no pick. There was, so right up near where this picture was taken, this is Jack's Creek on the NER. There was a stand of Cariporus squamosa, pheasant's back mushroom, which we talked about last month, and no one picked them. We're not picking them, so I was able to point them out to people and be like, hey, check out this cool edible mushroom, because they were left alone. It's much easier to educate people about things when they're in front of us, right? Okay. If there's any questions about foraging, put them in the chat. I'll address them as I can, but I want to get into basic ID of mushrooms. So this is just like a rundown to help us all get on the same page and have common vocab when we're talking about mushroom identification. So when you're identifying wild mushrooms, there are really like three go-to things that I look for. The structure. So how is the mushroom growing? Does it look like this? Or does it look like a morel? Or is it like growing out of the side of the tree? What generally is the form of the mushroom? Its spore-bearing surface. So does it have pits like this morel? Does it have gills? Like that kind of stuff. Both what kind of surface it is, the color of the surface, and the color of the spores themselves are all commonly used in identification. And then lastly, the substrate. So what does it eat? Therefore, where does it grow? Is great in identifying mushrooms. And this can, I have an example here when we're talking about mushrooms. This choice edible, this white morel, looks pretty similar to this Verpa bohemica, but you can see there's the spore-bearing surface here is pits, where the spore-bearing surface here is like these wrinkly folds. So this is the difference between a great dinner and an upset stomach and possible like loss of motor control. So we need to be able to talk about these types of things so we can correctly identify mushrooms and keep ourselves safe. Okay, so structure. This, I don't think it's too challenging. Cap, I think we can agree what the cap of a mushroom is. This is a pretty basic thing, this part up here. The stipe, that's the fancy word that mycologists use to refer to like the stem or the stalk. It's called the stipe. The stipe can be coming out of the ground. It can be long, it can be short, it can be coming out of a tree, or it can not exist at all. It can be sessile. Identification tool is an annulus ring, the presence or absence of it. So this wine cap here has a very prominent annulus ring. This is a remnant from when it was in like a universal veil, when it was in an egg, and when they grow out, they like burst open to make, and the cap fans out. So that's a remnant from when these two parts were attached. So the presence or absence of that can be an identification tool. Spore-bearing surface. So mushrooms can have a lot of different color and form of spore-bearing surfaces. So they can have gills, they can have pores, they can have spines. Not very common, but some of them that we're talking about today have spines. It can be smooth. They can have all sorts of different things. But definitely spore-bearing surface is almost always my go-to for when I'm starting identification. And then there's substrate, because generally a mushroom's ecology is a clue to where it can be found growing. So when we're talking substrate, we're talking what does it eat? So it can be parasitic, meaning that it takes nutrients from the host without giving anything back. It can be sapotrophic, which means it's a decomposer. It eats dead things like wood and leaves and that kind of stuff. Or it can be mycorrhizal, which means it creates a mutualistic association with tree roots. Mycorrhizal mushrooms are my favorite. I think they're the most interesting because more or less they are attaching their roots, their mycelium, to the roots of a tree and using the tree almost as like a carbon straw. Like the tree is photosynthesizing and making all these carbons, and the mushroom, the mycelium, is sucking that up. In exchange for, sometimes this association can bring the tree nutrients and water. It can also boost the tree's immune system. So it's good for the mushroom and the tree. And these mycorrhizal mushrooms, I'll start over here, are generally found growing out of the ground. They don't look like they're attached to anything because their association is made in the soil. Sapotrophic mushrooms are found on dead trees and debris because they're decomposing, they're breaking those things down. These honey mushrooms here are found on a decomposing stump. Sometimes it can appear that these mushrooms are growing on a living tree, but that tree is actually dead. It just doesn't look like it yet. And then parasitic mushrooms like this chaga are growing on living trees generally. Some mushrooms start out parasitic, and then when their host tree dies, they become sapotrophic and they'll break down the tree as well. So there can be some overlap as well. These, again, fungi do what they want. It's not always cut and dry. All right, so that's that on basic mushroom ID. And now let's get into some July wild edibles. So today I wanted to cover Chanterelles, the Cantharellus genus, hedgehog mushrooms, the Hydnum genus, and then oyster mushrooms, the Pleurotus genus. These are all great choice wild edibles that can be found in Michigan. Yeah, so I'm going to start with the Chanterelles. Here's some great pictures of them. There are kind of two groups in Michigan, the ones that are considered like the yellow ones and then the red ones. So our yellow ones tend to grow more upstate in the northern climates. Michigan has like a tension, I don't know if this is mirrored for you guys. It has a tension zone. So the plants that grow downstate versus upstate, like there's a clear divide. These yellow ones are more likely to grow in the upper part of the tension zone, and the red ones grow in the lower part of the state. So these ones you might find in Manistee National Forest, more likely in Hiawatha. In Michigan, all of which are edible. So if you're buying chanterelles or selling them, which you need a special permit to do, by the way, but they are all edible. They only have to be identified down to the genus. And there are 4 common ones that grow in Michigan. There's a question about the tension zone, so I'll back up about that. It's just like an area, more or less like a line that we can draw in Michigan that is like, there's a clear break in what plants grow where. For example, I'm from downstate and there's a lot of sassafras that grows down there. But you come upstate and there's no sassafras up here. And upstate, we are all very familiar with trillium. That does not grow downstate. So there's a clear like line of plant growth and mushroom as well. Chanterelles, they're the Cinnabarinus, Latin's hard. Those are the red ones that grow above that tension zone, in the UP grow mostly, the Cinnabaris grow below the tension zone, and the other ones grow above it, mostly in the UP. There are several species that grow, all of which are edible, so you only have to identify them to genus that grow. They fruit usually from June to September. They can be found in deciduous as well as conifer forests. More commonly, I find them in deciduous forests, and there are a poisonous lookalike that we're going to take a look at. So like mushroom taxonomy is in huge flux all the time. These ones are in a family, Cantharellus, of everything in this family is kind of like the common name for it is chanterelle. So like this mushroom is a true chanterelle. It's of this genus and this family, and so it's called a chanterelle. But then this one is also called a chanterelle. This is a Cantharellus. It's a more appropriate common name would be a trumpet. It's in the same family, but it's a different genus. And we covered these last month. If you're interested in learning about these ones grow mostly in June. Like June is their main growth time. And then the Hydnum, these ones also were once considered the same genus as chanterelles and then the same family as chanterelles, but now they have their own family, but they are the same order of chanterelles. So even these ones, this is the hedgehog mushroom that we'll be talking about later. Sometimes people still refer to these as chanterelles. So if you're doing research on your own and you run into all of these different genus types, Sometimes chanterelle is used synonymously to refer to like all these different genuses within this family or even this order. So just be aware of that. All right. When we are identifying these mushrooms, we can start with their structure. So color, they're going to be orange, yellow, or red. They're pretty bright mushrooms. Once you spot one, it's hard to stop seeing them. They're small to medium sized, though they can get pretty large. Height, like 3 to 5 inches at maturity. So you can see this is a pretty big one. I don't know if I would want to eat this mushroom because sometimes they get so big that they just like get like woody and tough. Kind of like if you let a squash or a cucumber overgrow, mushrooms can do the same thing. Their body is long-lived. That's part of why they can get so large. So it can grow in the ground for quite a while, especially because they're resistant to most bugs. However, slugs are a problem. Their caps are going to start out rounded, and then with maturity, they make like a cup or a funnel shape. They flatten out, and they're depressed in the center in general. And then the stipe, so the stalk or the stem that they grow on, can stain like a rusty color when bruised. So if you're pinching them, which you should pinch or cut mushrooms, it can turn this like rusty color after a few hours. Don't worry, you haven't like that part of the mushroom isn't like spoiled or you didn't pick a bad mushroom. That's just what they do. That can also be used as like an identification thing. If you're like, oh, this chanterelle thing stained, that can be a good indicator that it is a true chanterelle. Spore-bearing surface, so they have what's called pseudogills. They look like gills, except they're blunt and rounded, whereas a true gill will be sharp. And they're strongly decurrent, and so that means that they extend down the stipe. If we look, I'm probably a little on your screen, but if we look here at my wine cap mushroom, all of the gills are in the cap and they don't run down the stipe at all. So with the chanterelles, the stipe is, you know, a good portion of it is covered in these pseudogills. And then they're also forking and splitting. So you can see here they'll start out as one pseudogill and then turn and then continue to split. And then especially with the red ones, they have this cross venation between them. So look for, first of all, blunt and rounded edges, and then also decurrent down the stipe, and that forking and splitting is a good indicator. These ones, there are a lot of chanterelle, not poisonous, but things that look like chanterelles. So looking at these gills is probably going to be your, or these pseudogills is probably going to be your best bet for identifying them most accurately, beyond taking a spore print. Their substrate, so they are mycorrhizal, so they grow in association with both hardwoods and conifers, so they make that mycorrhizal association. They most commonly grow with oaks and beeches, although they are also found with spruce and hemlock trees. They grow in the woods near trees generally because that's where they're forming their association, and they can grow individually or in small clusters. But again, once you see some, you keep looking because you'll probably see a lot of them. I've been told that they prefer well-drained soil and are found on hillsides, so that might be a strategy to hunt on hillsides. But yeah, they grow like terrestrially out of the ground like this. And they grow together. So these are all chanterelles that are on the ground. So if you find one, you can like really get a big haul of them because they'll grow all together. And they're known to fruit in the same place year after year. So mark where you find a patch of them because you might find a patch of them the next year if the conditions are correct. Other notes about them, it's called like apricot chanterelles, the yellow ones especially, because they smell like fresh cut fruit, especially apricots. Here is the Cantharellus minor. So these are little, like this is almost as big as they get. And they probably should be picked when they're pretty young. Something like this is still edible, though it's probably not choice. And then like some stigma in the wild-foraged community about picking things that grow on or near conifers, because sometimes they are more likely to cause a reaction. But chanterelles that grow with conifers, they might be a little smaller. They could possibly be a different species. However, they're, as far as we know, completely safe. There has been like no reported reactions to eating a chanterelle that grows with a conifer. So unlike our chicken of the woods or our sulfur shelf, where if it grows with a conifer, you probably need to be wary of it, the chanterelles, the Cantharellus, they are okay if they grow near pine trees or spruce or hemlock. All right. Poisonous lookalikes. These ones do have some nasty ones that kind of look like it. So we have the Amphilotus alludens, the jack-o'-lantern. We also talked about these last month. These ones are bright yellow in color and they fruit in the fall. So we might be safe for a little bit still. And the big tell with these is that they have true gills, whereas our chanterelles have pseudo gills, blunt edges. Our jack-o'-lanterns are going to have those sharp edges. They're sapotrophic as well, so they grow on wood or at the base of a tree. So if you see a chanterelle growing on a stump, it's probably not a chanterelle, it's probably a jack-o'-lantern. And then they also have bioluminescence, so they glow in the dark. Their gills do. So if you're out in the woods hunting and you see a glowing mushroom, it could be a jack-o'-lantern and you shouldn't eat it. Also, we have what's called false chanterelles. I'm not going to try with this Latin right here, but these ones also fruit in the fall. I think these ones look more convincing of a chanterelle than our jack-o'-lanterns up here because their gills are a little bit more decurrent. The jack-o'-lantern isn't as decurrent as much. They again have true gills, so they have those sharp edges and they're sapotrophic, but these ones grow on debris, so they could be a little bit trickier because they might eat like leaves or something like that, so they won't be as obviously growing on like a stump. And I labeled these as toxic rather than poisonous because they're known to cause an upset stomach, but unlike the jack-o'-lanterns, they probably won't kill you. It'll just be really unpleasant, but not deadly. Next, I have a little quiz for you about which of these mushrooms is an edible chanterelle. So I'm going to launch a poll for you guys if I can figure it out. Okay. Yes, I do. Okay, so which one of these mushrooms do you think is an edible chanterelle? Okay. I think I have like 13, 14. How many of this? Oh, there's 19 right now. 15. So almost everybody's got this in. I'll give it a minute still. Investigate it closely. All right, let's take a look and see what everybody, I can share these with you. So most people answered B, which I would agree. This B over here, this is our chanterelle, golden chanterelle, and the one over here, this is our jack-o'-lantern. So to reiterate, our chanterelle is going to have these blunt, rounded edges, and they're going to fork. It's decurrent down the stipe, though it's not super obvious in this one. Whereas our jack-o'-lantern, these are true gills. It does appear like it's forking, but it's not the same. And these are sharp-edged, and it's not decurrent at all. It doesn't go down the stipe at all. Is there? All right. Cool. So most of you survived and did not die from eating a jack-o'-lantern. All right. So that concludes chanterelles. If there's any questions about those, go ahead and put them in the chat and I'll try to address them at the end at least. But now we're going to move on to the hedgehog mushrooms, which I think are just really cute. They have these spines on the bottom, which some people call teeth. Not a lot of mushrooms have these. So these are of the Hydnum genus, close relative to chanterelles, once considered a chanterelle. So another name for these is the sweet tooth, because they look like a donut and they have teeth. So another name that I think is very cute is the sweet tooth. There are a couple species of these that occur in Michigan, again, all of which are edible. So all of the mushrooms in this Hydnum genus are considered edible and choice, though they're not super common. Besides for these two here, we have the wood hedgehog and the depressed hedgehog. They fruit in July through October generally, and they can be found in mixed forests and swamps. These depressed are more common to be found in swamps, and there aren't really any serious poisonous lookalikes. Not a lot of mushrooms have this spine spore-bearing surface, and if they do, I don't know of any poisonous ones. They're mostly just inedible, so they either taste bad or they're like super woody and just aren't good to eat. These are like a safe mushroom to try out if you find one. Their caps are like 3/4 inches to 7 inches wide, so they can really vary in size. They should generally be picked when they're small, and depressed. So it has like this, this donut hole in the center, but it doesn't always have to look like that. Like here's one over here that's a less like ideal specimen. And the margins are wavy. So that's referring to this right here. Like the top view, it looks like a perfect circle more or less. But from the side view, you can see that there's some variation in the margin of the cap. It's a little wavy. And they're whitish to pale orange or like peach color. In this previous slide, you can see like this one is pretty orangey peachy, but most of them are this like more red color, this brownish, whitish color. Their spore-bearing surface. So again, they have those spines in those teeth, really cool to see and to feel. They're whitish to yellowish to pale orange. They're kind of like the same color in like variation of cap color. And they're generally not decurrent. Like the ones that you're going to find are only like a little run down to the site just a little bit, though there are some species out there that are strongly decurrent. This looks like to me like one of those things that you would drive through a car wash with. So these spines can run all the way down the stipe. But generally the ones that grow in Michigan don't do that. Okay, so these again are mycorrhizal, so they form those mutualistic associations with tree roots. These are associated with both woods and conifers, and again, they you don't. I'll get to that, guys. You don't need to worry about if they grow in association with conifers, unlike some other species of mushrooms. And the depressed mushroom, the Hydnum umbilicatum, grows in swampy woods, mostly in association with spruce, balsam, and cedar. So we have a lot of cedar up here, so we might be a little bit more likely to find this depressed hedgehog. It can be found on the forest floor, and they grow individually in small clumps, or just like our chanterelles, they can be found in those like large troops. Yeah, so they're cute little mushrooms. They should be harvested when they're young. Here's like a good handful. This is perfectly acceptable to harvest them when they're this age. The flesh is generally firm. It's got a mild odor and like a peppery taste. And again, should be harvested with when young. And yeah, be careful not to burn the spines. Some people will remove these spines before you eat them. Just like with the pheasant's back, Caryopora squamosus, you scrape the pores off. I would also recommend probably scraping these spines off, unless you're trying to do something like some culinary thing where you have like a different texture spine to the mushroom, but like the meat of it is this flesh right here on the cap, and the spines are like meh. I also don't know of a lot of people that eat the stipe, but the whole thing is edible, so try it out and see what you like. These are ones that you need to cook slow and low. They take a long time to become tender. And it's important when, especially wild mushrooms, that you cook them until they're thoroughly cooked. So these ones take a while. Not to get dirt in the spines when you're harvesting them. If they're old enough to have like very prominent spines, it's a pain in the butt to get dirt out of there. So you might have no choice at that point other than to scrape the spines off and not eat them. Close relative to some of our Michigan hydnums. So the Hydnum repandum, that is the like wood hedgehog. It's the most common one that you would find here. Then there's the Hydnum rufescens, which is a very close relative. It was actually considered like a variety of the wood hedgehog for a while, and it's said to have the best flavor. However, it's more common in Europe. I think I've seen 2 reportings of it in Michigan, and I think are incorrect identifications. Someone asked, can all of these be dried and eaten at a later time like morels? Generally, yes, the chanterelles are pretty good to dry. These are also pretty good to dry. The oysters, not as much. I would recommend the chanterelles are pretty good to dry, but for these and the oysters, I would recommend sauteing them and then like freezing them. That is generally like a good tactic. Because especially with these, because they take so long to become tender, you want to cook them up front and then freeze them and then, you know, put them in your broth or your soup or whatever when you get to them. These are good in like casseroles because they just take so long to cook, like a set and forget type meal. All right. I think that's all I have about these hedgehogs. If there's any other questions, again, feel free to put them in chat. I'll try to get to them. But let's continue on to oyster mushrooms. So let's see if I have any. I don't think I have any questions about these. Okay. Are there any insects that, if accidentally eaten, could harm you? Probably. Like, you should generally check your mushrooms for insects. And the oyster mushrooms, we will talk about a beetle that is very common on them. Always check your mushrooms for bugs, like morels even. You cut them open and sometimes there's like a whole colony of ants in them. A basic like salt soak is pretty good for that. Also, if you're sauteing them, it'll be really gross. But like at least you know that your mushroom had bugs in it and maybe you shouldn't eat them now. But yeah, with oyster mushrooms especially, we'll talk about the bugs that live in them. So these are my oyster mushrooms, the Pleurotus genus. So these ones, this is probably the stage when you should harvest them, when they're like young and cute like this, but they can get pretty big. These are a species of mushroom where the entire genus is edible. There are a couple different species that grow in Michigan. The golden pearl aspen and phoenix oyster are like the common ones that you'll find. And interestingly, the Pleurotus citrinopiliatus. There we go. The golden oyster was introduced. It's not native to here, but the oyster mushrooms, this genus, is pretty easy to cultivate. So they were introduced to cultivate and they just escaped from their farms and now you can find them wild, which is good for us, maybe not great for the ecosystem. I don't really know. When we think about invasive species, we don't usually consider fungus, so there's probably research to be done about that. These mushrooms grow more or less all year round. The best season to find them is like late June through October-ish. But if the conditions are right, you can see these fruiting all year round. They generally grow in deciduous forests, and there are no reasonable poisonous lookalikes with these. Again, in Michigan, there are so many that grow wild and are cultivated. So like, again, with the other mushrooms that we were talking about today, all of them in this genus are edible. All right. So identifying a oyster mushroom, it's going to have that fan-shaped cap again. It can be circular if it's growing upright from a log, but generally they kind of look like a fan. And then they grow in these like shelf clusters. The citrinopiliatus, the golden oyster, I think these ones are a little bit more round than they are like this fan shelf than the native ones are. And also these striking yellow, whereas our native ones are going to be more of like a brownish, like mouse color. They grow in overlapping clusters, and the cap is smooth. It's almost clammy when young, like sticky to the touch. That is when they are best, in my opinion, is when they have that like kind of clammy texture. And their stipe is pretty short. Like here, you don't even really see a stalk on them. With the introduced species, the stipe is a lot more prominent. However, it doesn't have to be. Sometimes they just grow right out of the tree like a shelf. Which of the following best describes the spore-bearing surface of this of our oyster mushrooms? So let me launch a poll. And give me a guess, because I've taught you some things about spore-bearing surfaces. So what would you guess? Do we think these are pores, gills, pseudogills, or spines? There's a little bit of disagreement. All right. Your final answer then. All right. I'll end it there. So I can share these results. The majority of people said that these were gills or pseudogills, which is correct. These are gills. They're sharp, edged, which is how we know that they're true gills. A pseudogill, like in a chanterelle, would be rounded and blunt. They're often forking. And then the spines, those were the teeth that we saw on the Hydnum and the hedgehog mushrooms. So these ones, these are definitely true gills. They're nice and sharp. All right. So yes, their spore-bearing surface. They are gills. They're sharp and they have these smooth edges. Kind of thing up here where they're overlapping, that can be mistaken for that forking, but they're not connected. You can see like these are individual gills that are just like new ones growing up here. They are decurrent, so they spread down, extend down the stipe, and they're generally whitish. They can change in little bit different color as they age, but like the gills are more or less white. And two things in detail, but about the spore bearing surface. First of all, they produce a lot of spores. So when you harvest them and put them in a bag or whatever, they're gonna drop a lot of spores, like almost immediately, overnight at least. And then you need to watch them for beetles and the beetle larvae. It's very, in my experience, uncommon to find an oyster mushroom that does not have bugs in it. But as we'll talk about, that's okay. All right, their substrate. So there's a little bit of variation, but in general, they're sapotrophic on trees and logs. So again, sapotrophic meaning that they are decomposers. So these are decomposers of trees and logs. However, oyster mushrooms are very interesting because they're also carnivorous. That a mushroom could be carnivorous. So they will eat nematodes and bacteria. So they will encounter a nematode, it'll enter its substrate and they will exude a toxin to paralyze the nematode, and then they will digest it. Fungus are external digesters. They split from the animal kingdom when animals decided we wanted internal stomachs and mushrooms decided they wanted to just digest things on the outside. So they use these nematodes and bacteria to supplement their nitrogen. Dead trees are not a great source of nitrogen. So nematodes and bacteria are. So I think that's cool that there's carnivorous mushrooms out there, but generally you'll find them growing on dead trees and logs. So the introduced ones, the golden ones, are found mostly on elm, log, and trees. The pearl oyster, which is probably the most common one, can be found on a variety of deciduous trees on hardwoods. The Pleurotus populinus grow on aspen. They're called the aspen oyster, sorry. And they exclusively live on dead populus trees. So populinus, the genus of poplars, cottonwoods, and aspens, that's what they grow on. Populinus, there you go. Sometimes Latin can be your friend and it can help you out a little bit. And then our phoenix oyster, those ones also grow on a variety of living and dead deciduous. Some other notes on these. So let's see, they're white. They have gills, true gills, and they grow on living and dead trees, mostly dead trees and logs. And they're carnivorous. But some other notes, so they fruit throughout the year, as I've alluded to, under favorable conditions. So usually that means warm-ish temperatures and some rain. So we saw a couple weeks ago perfect conditions for them, and I saw a variety of oyster mushrooms come out. It was awesome. Older specimens, they begin to yellow and the margins become ragged. So you can tell here that this is generally just like not an appealing mushroom, and it's inedible at this point. It's just too woody and like gross and you won't really want to eat it. Also, it's going to lack that like clammy texture that a nice, fresh, choice specimen is going to have. And bugs. So they're often found with these small red and black beetles in the gills. They sometimes will like burrow through the gills, but the beetle themselves does not eat the mushroom. It's the larvae that eat the mushroom. So these are called pleasing fungus beetles. Sometimes they're all black, or sometimes they're like half black and half white. And the beetle is harmless. Just, brush the beetle out of there. But you don't want to eat a mushroom that's infested with larvae. I don't think it'll kill you, but it's probably just not a great practice to be eating beetle larvae. So again, if you see the adult ones, that's fine. Like I find mushrooms with adult beetles in them, and you just like pick them off, brush them out, but you want to check them for the little worms. Unfortunately, the worms are white, so they're hard to see, but you can do a salt soak when you're cutting it open and like slicing it to prepare it. Check it then. Last thing, if you put it in the pan and you start frying it and you see little things come out wiggling, getting fried alongside your mushrooms, probably don't eat it because it's infested with larvae. Extra protein, yeah, but maybe not the safest thing. And then oyster mushrooms, they're one of the easiest mushrooms to cultivate. Log for 2 to 4 years. So if you're on like private land and you see a log growing with oysters, you can just like pick up that log and take it home, keep it out of the wind, in a nice spot. Lots of resources on the internet on how to cultivate these. Again, in the wild though, like at national parks and that kind of, or national forests, don't harvest off a national park. National forests, you can, you have to leave them, but you can like pinpoint and come back to the same tree because they'll fruit on the same tree for a while. All right. And then, yes, some lookalikes and some reactions. So there are no poison or toxic lookalikes. However, there are some nasty lookalikes out there. First of all, the bear lentinus, these ones, they're inedible in the sense that they just taste really bad. They have a very bitter, peppery taste. Some people mistake these for oysters, and you will like take one bite and immediately know that it's not an oyster mushroom because of just how like it's like your tongue gets pepper sprayed. And that burning can last for a while. So they're just really not they're not poisonous. They're not going to hurt you, but they are not a great experience. You can tell these apart because often they'll have this fuzzy cap on top. They're like the ursinus, the bear, I think because they have this fuzziness on top. They do have true gills, but the gills have these like tiny, they almost look like a serrated knife, little jagged edges, a way to tell them apart. And then other reactions, they just produce a lot of spores. So if you're cultivating them or if you harvest a whole bucket load of them, you can become irritated by the airborne spores, runny nose, rash, even itchy eyes. So if you know you're sensitive to that kind of stuff, maybe don't come home with like a whole basket of oyster mushrooms or like visit an oyster farm. Not ideal. All right. And I think with that is like the 3 that I wanted to do a deep dive on. I have some best practices for harvesting and consuming left, and then some resources at the end. But I'll give us a pause here if we have any questions, and if I have more question for you guys, maybe while you're thinking of some questions for me. We talked about a variety of different genuses today, some of them that are and their edibility. So my question for you is, are all the species in the oyster mushroom family edible? Or in the genus, are they edible? All right. Oh, some final answers trickling in. Okay, I think I'll end it here. So I'll show you what everyone said. So a good majority of us remembered that all of the species in this genus are edible. So anything identified to the Pleurotus genus is edible. Any of these species that you find, if you know it's this genus, is edible. And that goes for all of the mushrooms that I did a deep dive on today. All of the Cantharellus species and all the Pleurotus species that grow in Michigan are considered edible and choice. Good eat. If someone doesn't know exactly what the chanterelle is, they're not sure if it's a Cantharellus minor or a Cantharellus citrinaris, doesn't matter. They're both edible. So enjoy. All right. Then I just have some best practices for you. I'll go through these rather quickly because we covered them in depth last month. But first of all, don't munch mushrooms if you are certain of their identification. Only eat mushrooms if you are certain of their identification, and only harvest mushrooms if you intend to eat them. Mushrooms spoil very quickly. You can do a couple things like if you're storing mushrooms long term, I would keep them in a paper bag and change out the bag almost daily to keep them fresh. You can saute them halfway and freeze them, and a lot of mushrooms you can also dehydrate, and those do well like that. And then keep mushroom species separate. So I pulled this basket up here to show two things. One, we wouldn't eat all these mushrooms. Oops. And then two, there is a variety of different species in here. It looks like they're trumpets. They're mostly Chanterelles, but there are a couple different species. And it's practice to keep them all separate. So if you do identify, like, actually, this is a jack-o'-lantern. Well, now your jack-o'-lantern could have potentially contaminated all these other mushrooms. So keep your species separate. Bring a knife and a paper bag when you go to hunt mushrooms. So you should cut mushrooms at their base so that you don't disturb the mycelium. Here's a mushroom that is saprophytic mushroom that I kind of dug out of a log. It's mycelium root. The fruit. I love this analogy of like an apple tree and the apples. So you can pick all of the fruit off an apple tree and the tree is fine. You can pick all of the mushrooms and the mycelium, the tree, is fine, and it'll continue to make fruit year after year. But if you start messing with the mycelium, digging around the dirt, accidentally pulling out the base of the mushroom, which is attached to these roots, you're damaging the mycelium and you're reducing its productivity. So putting them at the base is probably your best bet and the best thing you can do for them. You should store mushrooms in containers that allow for gas exchange. So paper bags are always my go-to. Wax paper I'll use for the Pleurotus, for the oyster mushrooms, because they are kind of clammy. So I just feel better when I store them in wax paper. And then, that goes for never storing them in airtight containers. So never put a mushroom in a Ziploc bag or even like Tupperware. It's just going to make it spoil faster. And then consumption best practices: be a picky eater. Only consume mushrooms if you are certain of their identification, and you need to cook them thoroughly consuming. It's just best practice to help all of the chitin in there break down. So you can see here's me. This is an oyster mushroom that I found, and here's me frying it. Very delicious, just with some butter in a pan, and they turn this nice crispy color. But this is also one mushroom worth. So you want to limit your portion size whenever you eat a new species. So like the entire oyster genus is edible, you might have different reactions to different species, and everybody is different. You can become allergic to anything at any time. So always, if it's your first time eating a species, I would just be careful. Try like one mushroom at a time and see how it sits with you. And I mean, like, try one and wait like 3 days, because sometimes mushroom reactions can take up to like 36 to 48 hours to start showing symptoms. So wait a while, even though I know you're really excited. And then do not consume more than one new species of mushroom at a time. Just because if you have a cocktail of all of these mushrooms in you, and for whatever reason you do have a reaction, it's going to make it harder for them to track down what is actually causing the reaction. If it was a poisonous lookalike and they need to treat you for poison, or if it's just like an allergic reaction to one of the species. So just try them and cook them all the way through, try them a little bit at a time and one species at a time. All right. And then I have some resources for you here. I'm constantly finding new resources that I like, but I have some tried and true ones as well. So the Midwest American Mycological Information, MAMI for short, they're found at midwestmycology.org. They are kind of like the authority in training people to become wild forage identification experts. The Michigan Department of Ag and Rural Development, MDARD, does all of their trainings through there. So they are a great resource. You're welcome. The Learn Your Land is a great resource as well. Adam Harriton, I think is his name. Really awesome YouTube channel. He offers classes and that kind of stuff, and will teach you things that you need to know to be an effective mushroom hunter, like tree identification and how to not get in poison ivy, that kind of stuff. Shroomify is an app that mushroom ID app that I recently found and really like. And then Fungi Woman is like a blog that talks a lot about like the cultural value and how to cook wild forage mushrooms. And then one that I just found was First Nature. So first-nature.com/fungi will teach you about the etymology of mushroom names. So like, why does it have this Latin name? What does a Latin name? So I'm really interested in that kind of stuff. So maybe you want to check that out as well. And again, here's my contact. You can always use the Grand Traverse Conservation District in the Boardman River Nature Center as a resource. Stop in Tuesday through Friday, 11 to 2, or by appointment. Email me or give me a call because, email me your weird mushroom pictures. I'll identify it for you, or I'll try, or whatever. And I can help you out. That's my job, is to help answer nature related questions. Cool. I hope everybody had a great time. That's more or less what I had for you. These slides, as well as the webinar recording and all of these resources, will be available to you in a follow-up email shortly. If there's any other questions, I will stick around and answer them. I hope you all have fun mushroom hunting, and yeah, have a good one. I'll see you next month. We'll talk about more mushrooms.